Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for all of you for taking your time out of your day to come and see all of us. It's wonderful to have some like-minded individuals in the room and people that are wanting to think about things a little bit differently. As Brian said, I am a dispatcher, and I have one message for law enforcement today. And that message is to embrace your dispatcher. It may save your life. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, embrace your dispatcher. I'm not talking about that. Get your mind out of the gutters. What I'm talking about is embrace the value that your dispatch brings to the first responder team. How many of you actually do consider your dispatcher as part of the team? Usually we think of fire, ambulance, police, but we don't think about the dispatcher. By definition, dispatchers are responders. Do you know why? They answer the call, they get the location, they get details of the event, and they say very helpful things, sometimes life-saving instructions, before the actual physical responders get there. That makes us responders. And so that opens up a whole host of other issues, other challenges. When Brian and Roy asked me to speak at this function today, they put a question to me and they said, what challenges is 911 facing today? And what an overwhelming question that was, given I only have 18 minutes to tell you all of that. But I'm going to break it down for you piece by piece and tell you some stories. One of the biggest challenges that 911 dispatchers face is the fact that they have a responder mindset, but they're not actually physically responding to the call. I'm just going to let that sink in. They have a responder mindset, but they're not actually attending the call physically. As you know, the mind does not know the difference between fiction and reality. So when an emergency call comes in, whether it be on the telephone or whether it be over the radio, the stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, kick in because it doesn't understand that it's not your emergency, it's their emergency. So there's a disconnect right from the beginning. So we're fighting physiological challenges right from the get-go. What does adrenaline and cortisol do? They amp up your large muscle groups. Your large muscle groups that are needed to fight that fight, win that fight, and go home safe to your family. True? The same physiological response happens for a dispatcher who's sitting in that chair with the headset on, connected to that phone, or connected to that radio. And they don't actually need any of their large muscle groups to win this fight. What do they need? Their fine motor skills. Challenge number 2. Again, physiological dissonance, right? There's a disconnect there. So how do we fix this problem? One of the ways that I approached it in my training program in my agency was I offered a mental preparation program. So similar to what law enforcement officers are doing, mentally preparing through guided imagery to win fights, we're doing the same thing by mentally preparing them for calls that might come their way so that they can do guided imagery to go through the whole process. What that does is it actually creates a file in their mind so that when it actually does happen, they can draw on that file and move from there. A really good example of this happened with one of our call evaluators who was taking a suicidal call from a male. He phoned 911 for 2 reasons. He wanted to say goodbye, and he wanted the responders to come and get his body so that his family didn't have to find him that way. As you can well imagine, suicide calls can be a trigger for people, true? And this was a trigger call for her, which I knew it was. She was on the phone for not even a minute with this male before he decided to jump and end his life. I went over to talk to her afterwards to see if she was okay. And she said, "You know what, Connie? I'm fine, because I know that he had me caring for him in his last moment of his life." See, she made it about him, not about her. And so that helplessness that she could have felt by not being prepared changed into empowerment. And when we talk about PTSD and we talk about some of these things that are going on, we're actually seeing in our profession that 25 to 31% of 911 officers are being diagnosed with PTSD. Now, our occupation in North America is only about 60 years old. So this didn't happen overnight. This took a long time. But how can we reach out to our dispatch centers to give them the message of this mental preparation that you guys know so much about and bring it into those centers so that they can also benefit from that? Because they are, in fact, in a little bit of a different situation than law enforcement officers because, like I said before, they're sitting in that chair. They're literally pickling their organs in cortisone and adrenaline. And there's no way to get that out because they're sitting in those chairs for 10, 12 hours. It's one of the most unhealthy jobs aside from coal mining and prostitution. You know? Why do we do it? Right? Again, the theme is because we want to help people. Why do law enforcement officers and firefighters and medics run towards danger when everyone else runs away? It's a calling. We're no different. We're no different. I had the pleasure, I suppose, of traveling to New York City in 2008. And I went to go see the Ground Zero Memorial. In the museum, I was able to listen to a real 911 call from a woman on one of those doomed airplanes. She was about to be murdered by a terrorist, and the one thing that she did was dial 911. She talked for a few moments with a 911 officer out of New York City Dispatch. And I was amazed at the calmness of this dispatcher's voice. And don't you hear that all the time about dispatchers, about how calm we are, right? Don't let that fool you. We're like ducks, that are swimming on the water, and we look so peaceful, but underneath it's, there's a lot of emotion going on there. So if your dispatcher is sounding calm on the radio, calm on the phone, that doesn't mean that they're actually calm. They're just trained to push that down, which again causes other health issues, right? And so as she's talking to this lady on the plane, this lady wants her to write down some messages, some last I love you messages to her family at home, because she knows how this is going to end. Dispatcher says, yes, tell me what those messages are. And they have this conversation, and this it's heart-wrenching, really, to listen to. And then you can hear some noise in the background. You can hear some screams, some motion, and then static, presumably when the aircraft hits the World Trade Center. And then silence. Piercing silence. The line is still connected. The 911 operator is captured. Ma'am, are you still there? Oh. And then a cry. I think they're gone. And the line goes dead. What do you think that 911 dispatcher did on 9/11 after that call ended? Do you think she got up, took a break, had a drink of water, walked around to remove all that adrenaline, all that cortisol? Could she? No. Because the place was going crazy. It was chaos. She took the next call. She took the next call. She sounded so exhausted. How many people had she talked to before that lady? How many people afterwards? We don't know. I don't even know if she's still doing the job today. I don't know if she ever passed that message along to that lady's family. Which is point number 2 here, closure. Your dispatchers do need closure. So if you are going to a critical event, it's a good idea to actually tell them how it ended in the end, because often we think of the worst. Whenever we don't know the answer to something, our mind needs to know the answer, and if we don't get it, we'll just fill it in with probably something very horrifying, because that's what we do. Okay, so if it was a no cause, it was a non-issue, just let us know. About a year after the Aurora shooting, you guys remember this one, the Batman premiere in Aurora, Colorado? There's a mass shooting there. I'm sure that the dispatchers there could not mentally prepare enough for what was going to happen in their call center that day. It was absolute chaos. So I went to go visit them about a year afterwards, and I got to talk to some of the call evaluators and dispatchers that were involved in that event. And it was absolute chaos. They had radio issues. They were quickly overwhelmed. They had to bring in Denver. And then they had difficulties patching radio with Denver and Aurora, and so there was a lot of communication chaos with all of that. A lot of stress put on the dispatchers. It actually degraded some of the officer and dispatcher relationships after that, because there was a loss of trust, because they felt their dispatch center should have managed that better and didn't. And so there was a lot of degraded trust. I was sitting with the dispatcher that night when she put an officer out on a traffic stop, and minutes went by and she didn't do a unit contact on this officer. And so I just asked, I was just curious. I'm there for, sit along, and I'm not judgmental or anything like that, but I was just curious. She said, "Oh, our officers don't like us doing unit contacts." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And maybe that's changed since I was there, so just take that with, a grain of salt. But in the 1990s, in our agency in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, we actually lost a law enforcement officer when he was murdered at a traffic stop. And so ever since then, policy has been quite strict that dispatchers check on their units every 3 minutes, or 3 minutes after booking out. And one particular sunny summer night, this actually came in handy for me. So I've been doing police dispatch for almost 20 years now, and most of the time, these traffic stops in Canada, they're pretty easy going. I've never had anything all that drastic happen. But this one summer night, I did. And my district sergeant, who was a one-man unit, decided to pull over a truck with 2 occupants inside because he thought they were impaired. It was a super busy night. I was managing 2 districts, and the 2 districts were roughly as far apart as Denver was to Aurora, so we're talking about 10 minutes, these districts. And it had everything from our downtown population to our most affluent riverside population. And so roughly, I'm managing about 75 to 100 units, right? So it's a pretty large municipal area. And so this officer books out, I get him a 2-man officer to back up, and I move on. And I'm dispatching disturbances, domestics, drunks, you know the drill, it's a typical summer weekend night shift. It's a good thing that my technology has a reminder system in process for our dispatchers, because he highlighted, which reminded me, oh yeah, I have to go check on Mike. That's his name, Mike. So I checked on him. And the way I do it is I say 1201, unit contact. What he's supposed to say is, I'm code 15 dispatch. And then I'm happy. But that didn't happen that night. He keyed his mic, and I heard a bunch of fighting in the background. He was fighting for his life, and I knew he needed help. I quickly went all channels, because in our jurisdiction, or in our service area, I can click on one button and have access to my whole entire city. No channel patch problems like they did in Denver and Aurora. And I said, all units, all channels, officer needs assistance at this location. It was such a busy night, I only had a couple people say that they would attend. My closest unit was 10 minutes away. I had practiced this scenario in my head a number of times before it actually happened, thankfully. And I had practiced it a number of times in my head ahead of time because I had gone to law enforcement conferences like this one and heard about it. And I thought, jeepers, what would I do in that situation? So I'm glad that I did. Rather than feel helpless, I actually remembered that I have one thing that this officer needs right now, and that's my voice. You see, the third thing is that dispatchers need to attend your police training, your law enforcement training. We need to understand how you guys fight those fights. We need to understand how you conduct traffic stops. We need to understand how you clear buildings and all of that stuff. We need to understand how you handle an active assailant so that when it happens, we know how to help you and not get in your way. And because I'd been to that training, I was able to talk to Mike while his backup was 10 minutes away. And as I was talking to Mike, I was talking to him in the tone of voice of, come on, buddy, you can do this, you can win. And I knew that because I knew that he was trained how to fight and how to win. And so, here's how the last 90 seconds played out. 12:01, you have lots of backup on the way. ETA, 90 seconds. I was praying that he would copy me, but again, it was just silence as I watched the clock tick down. Every second felt like a year. 12:01, you have lots of help on the way. ETA, 60 seconds. And I watched the clock tick down. 12:01, you have lots of help on the way. ETA, 30 seconds. What a relief when backup finally came over the air and said, dispatch, we're out, he's code 15. Knowing what I know now, I got up from the dispatch terminal, took a walk around, took a big swig of water, got, resituated again. About an hour later, Mike called me, and he said, Connie, thank you. I didn't hear the sirens that were coming to back me up. I didn't hear the batons as they were deploying. I didn't hear the backup officers screaming commands at those two guys. What I heard was your sound the sound of your voice, in my head, telling me how much longer I had to fight. So we talked about it, which is the next point. Debrief with your dispatchers afterwards. I didn't get any accolades, I didn't get any medals, I didn't want them. I just wanted that time with Mike. And we found out that we actually shared a lot of the same physiological responses while he was fighting for his life the same time that I was dispatching that event. We connected. And so I'm going to leave that with you and your dispatch centers. Thank you for all that you do.